Festivities begin, and welcome to a brand new episode of Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and all things mental health.
I'm your co-host, Mark.
Hey, this is Billy. I'm here for the party.
And I have not eaten the pubes yet, but my name is Josh, and Billy's pick is a little bit weirder. And honestly, in over 100 and some odd episodes, I'm surprised that we haven't covered this movie sooner.
We've talked about it a few times.
We
And
have.
And that's why I picked it, because you two kept talking about it and I hadn't seen it. So
I don't
figured,
know
why not?
I don't know how you've gone this far without seeing it.
I don't know. It may have been just time.
Fucking
Honestly,
slacker.
you know what?
Not even just jumping right into name calling, just not even like announcing which movie we're talking about this week. We're talking about 2019's Midsommar, which is Ari Aster's follow-up to Hereditary, which we'll be doing in a couple weeks. But Billy, this was your first time viewing, and I think Mark and I are on the edge of our seats to know what you thought about it.
Well, I'm going to start with following up on Life After Beth that we just watched. The beginning of this really caught my attention because of how it begins, how it starts in the storyline, the way it plays out. But I really enjoyed this movie. I'm not saying I'm here for the cubes or anything, but I enjoyed the movie.
You didn't look at the screen longing to be that Jack's character in that moment.
No, I mean, maybe without the sides of the pubes and the special juice and all, I would have been okay.
I mean, they spent the entire portion of Midsommar fucking high as a kite.
Exactly. And they were in Sweden.
Yep.
Which I think is always fascinating when you look at this film, because we as Americans, we really look at a lot of these customs the same way that Christian or Danny or especially Mark would look at these traditions and really kind of be weirded out. But it's also like you have to take into consideration like the other culture and the context, the things that feel weird to us, feel normal to them, and vice versa. I mean, this film has like some like really uncomfortable scenes, and again, they're not as uncomfortable when you kind of look at it through the context of like, this is someone else's like culture, this is what they've been raised in, this is normality for them.
Yeah, and it's not as drastic though when you've lived there and you've lived around some of the different things over there. Not saying I've lived around everything they were going through, but seeing some of the other cultures when I was in Europe, it hits different when you come back and watch some of these movies.
That was one of the things with Midsommar that always got me, is how they kept talking about it's a cult movie. It didn't really seem like a cult movie. It seemed more like just a different culture than a cult. And that's what always bothered me about the description of the movie, because they were following some Norse and pagan belief that they held, and it was always described as a cult, and it wasn't a cult. It was just a different culture.
Yeah.
Well, see, this movie, as I'm watching it, made me think of a couple movies we got for Horrific Hope, and you know which ones they are, Josh.
Yeah, the ones you can't talk about yet.
Yeah, you can't talk about them. But I'm just saying, that's the feeling I got after watching those like weeks and months ago as we're going through that. Then watching this, it's like, wow, how many more movies are out there like that and similar and things like that?
We were joking about this in the group chat on Saturday, but my wife, Erica, had watched this movie with me for the first time, and I didn't tell her anything about this. And some of the sequences, like the two elders essentially taking their own lives, and the swan dive, the sequences where you have Christian eating the pube, and kind of the kind of the exploration as like Josh and is kind of like going through the quilt, and you're kind of getting to see like what the love runes are and stuff like that.
Mhm.
A lot of that stuff, she was like, "Oh man, this is a cult," and Mark summed it up perfectly. Like, this is not a cult. This is a difference in culture. This is a difference in beliefs. And when you look at statistically what makes up a cult movie within the horror genre or even documentaries, it's an outsider entering into a structure that is slowly brainwashing them, essentially. Whereas this is, you're essentially following uh five, yeah, 6 people as they're kind of going through this, just essentially just looking and just being outsiders, almost to the point of being like documentarians.
Yeah. Well, one of them was. So, one person out of the group was there as a documentarian.
Which is
One
Josh,
one
Right.
person was there for a party.
which is Will, or Mark,
Yeah.
Will Poulter.
Christian kind of went to just go, but turned it into a school thing. I'm not even sure why he exactly went overall. And
Because it's convenient for the plot, Mark.
Originally, I think he went to try to escape Danny because
Yeah.
he was
Yeah.
on the fence of being with her, and he was using that as space.
well, and Danny went because she was invited and she was just kind of lost
Mhm.
and didn't have anywhere else to be. I
Yeah.
mean, so I think I know she's the main character of the movie, but I think her journey through the whole movie was the most important.
Oh, 100%. And I also want to throw in there, I also think that like they're never quite explained like in depth as in depth as like, you know, Danny or Christian or Josh or Mark, but Connie and Simon also too, being friends of Ulf, getting to see them kind of experience this culture as well. But that's also never really kind of explained. It's as well as the other ones are. They're just kind of
They were the
there.
two from London, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And each one, as you watch the movie, they serve a certain purpose, and that's why they were invited. It seems like
Yeah.
was for that
Kind of.
purpose.
Kind
I didn't
of.
watch the director cut, so I don't know about the director cut. I watched the
Well,
original. So if you've watched the director, fill me in.
no, they talk about it in the regular theatrical version too. Well, not so much talk about it. You pay attention and figure
Yeah.
out why they became sacrifices. Every one of them that became a sacrifice essentially did something to offend their belief.
Yep.
And they found disrespectful. Every one of them.
Wasn't it Mark that pissed on the tree?
Yep. Mark
Yeah.
was the one that pissed on the tree.
It's always a Mark
Josh-
that does that.
Josh
Always a
took
Mark.
pictures of it. Josh took pictures of the
The
book and
book,
got
yep.
caught.
Simon and Connie both kind of really made a huge scene in like public kind of disgrace of the swan
So-
dive scene.
Yeah.
What was his name?
Simon.
He was the one that threw the biggest fit
Mhm.
and kind of put that whole belief down. This is crazy. This is mad. And he ends up getting
Right.
blood eagled. And then Connie threw the fit about him disappearing and them saying, well, they only had room in the car for one. So she kind of started questioning everything. Danny's the only one out of all of them that didn't start questioning and showing disrespect to their culture.
Which I think going back to Danny's journey, I think you nailed it correctly right out the gate, talking about how Danny is the center point of this movie.
Yeah.
When most people remember anything about this movie, they are kind of remembering that final frame of Danny in all of the flowers and the May Queen like halo, kind of crown and just kind of like dementally smiling. But when you look at like her journey, she has got to have one of my favorite character journeys out of any modern horror film, because she essentially, in the matter of a like 24-hour period, she essentially just loses everything. She holds near and dear to her sister, killed mom and dad, then killed herself. Then you have this like whole like subplot of like her Christian not wanting to be with her anymore and kind of creating this distance, and like him almost having this like resistance. There's like this awkward between like her and all of this like friend group, and so she just does feel lost. And the one thing that really like struck me about this viewing is that scene in the the housing hut where it's her and Pele, and he's talking about what this culture has meant to him. And he talked about how like after my parents died, I was held by this community. And he like pauses and he goes, "Do you feel held by Christian?" And that's kind of like this like first sign where you're like, no, like you can see like there's obvious stuff here that is broken.
Right. Especially, I mean, he couldn't remember her birthday or anything like that. It took Pele to remind him of that. And she was talking to him about, I forget which character it was that left. And he's sitting there trying to do like an interview and kind of pushes her off, even though he's holding her to a certain extent. He kind of like turns his attention back to trying to get more about the culture. And matter of fact, the topic was about incest. And he was more concerned about that than her. So just signs of that was just the way that relationship was.
Well, the friends had talked about in the bar that he had been checked out of that relationship for at least a year.
Right.
And he only invited Danny to go along essentially out of pity, because
pity or guilt.
Yeah.
Either way, either one fits. But that's the only reason she was invited to begin with. And then she went along with certain things for no other reason than she felt like she was dragging the group down from having fun and stuff.
Well, to me, it felt like, I mean, you can correct me, and I'm coming in as a new person to it, but it felt like Pele was pulling some of the strings of like, he knew what he wanted each person to represent when they went to visit. Like
him and other villagers that were bringing guests were bringing in essentially new blood,
right?
Either for breeding purposes or for sacrifices.
I looked at it kind of almost as a Latter-day Saint would go on their like missionary trip. So essentially they are going from door to door or talking to people in parking lots, and their whole entire thing is to convert people over to their religion. And that's what a lot of like characters like Pele or Ulf felt like to me, to where they were essentially trying to, like you said, Mark, like expand and kind of bring in that new blood. But kind of done through that, where I don't think at that time like they had any intent of being offensive or sacrificed.
They were brought as guests. I don't think they overall had an idea of what they were being brought there as guests for. I think they had some ideas, but I don't think, well, at least in Danny's group, the two from London, I'm pretty sure he brought them to be sacrificed because of the way he talked about, we were dating. And she's like, we went on one date once and it was kind of awkward kind of thing. I think he brought those two to have them sacrificed. But Danny's group, I think, was brought more so to expand the gene pool, possibly.
I definitely think you're right. And I'll tell you why I think you are. I think that much like kind of they talk about it throughout the movie, there's several moments where you see different people in the village talk about and specifically say every person serves a specific role here. Like one scene that's coming to mind is like one of the lunch or dinner scenes where like Danny and Christian are talking to someone who has a baby, and she basically turns to them and says, everyone takes care of the children here. It's kind of,
Yeah.
what you do. And
Yeah.
so it kind of does make sense, but it also kind of goes back to that scene between Josh and one of the elders as they're kind of as the elders showing Josh the holy scripts, the kind of the holy textures. And he's like, kind of talking about how Reuben is like the oracle of like the spirits because he's unclouded, and it's also revealed that like he's a product of inbreeding. And so it definitely seems like you have a lot of those a lot of the guests, especially for Pele's group, feels like they were brought in to kind of continue the generational line without the need for inbreeding.
Yeah. Hold on 1 second. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which I also like gotta say too, like is like probably one of the weirdest. I've seen this movie quite a few times now, and the sex scene between Christian and Maja is incredibly uncomfortable every time I see it. And I understand it's like it's different. People look at the act of sex as a spiritual thing, and to some degree, I also believe that. But to kind of have it done in this unique way is just kind of wild to me, and it's very uncomfortable to also think. But it continues on that conversation.
Yeah, what was it, like 8 girls around them or something like that, and they're in the middle of some flowers, and I mean, I was like, oh my god, what?
And I think also too when he ejaculates and she like goes back on her back and she kind of does that like almost like turtle thing,
Yeah,
and she's like, I can feel it,
Yeah.
I can feel it
Yeah.
moving. And I was just like, every time I watch this movie, I'm just like, that is like freaking
Unsettling.
unsettling.
Yeah.
Unsettling. But
Unsettling.
also this is like one of like the first A24 films that like gave us this trope of like naked old people.
Yeah.
Hereditary did that.
It did. Also
lot.
a Ari Aster movie, but like he
It
was the kind of the
it wasn't as direct as Midsommar, but there were
No.
lots of naked old people in Hereditary.
which again started this whole like trend of like weird, just if it's can't be an A24 film unless there's like wrinkly balls in it.
One of the things I think is cool in Midsommar is the fact that if you pay attention to the artwork, even the very opening of the movie, the opening mural, gives you kind of the story that's coming. And the artwork in the background in the village tells you what's getting ready to happen throughout the story of different scenes. You just have to, it's one of those things you don't really catch until the second or third viewing of it.
Yeah,
There's even little things hidden in the background, like almost like the ghost of the sister in the trees during the May
Yeah.
May Queen sequence. There's one scene you go by and you can see the sister's face with the hose strapped to it in the trees. Anytime they're dealing with one of the characters hallucinating, you can see like the trees pulsating when they're showing that character's point of view. So there was little touches like that that were just kind of cool overall. And they show somebody had gotten blood eagled. That was kind of fun too.
yeah. I also like, kind of going back to I want to go back because I think we kind of glazed over it. There's a lot to talk about in this movie. This is probably one of the longer movies we've covered on here, but also I think in terms of mental health, this is probably one of the most vital films we've covered in 140 episodes, because specifically the fact that like Danny feels almost like a cautionary tale where you want to make sure that you have maintained for yourself like good community. And I think that's partially, why we get the whole iconic like breathing, like crying scene after she finds out about walking on a Christian and Majah is
Well,
like understanding that like breathing in and together, and like that she actually has a support system and a structure here now.
so Danny's story, depending on how you want to look at it, can be one of two things. Either she's found a place that she can call home and family, or Stockholm syndrome.
I don't
Because
look at it as
there is a lot of drugs involved, specifically hallucinogens, and a lot of those are used in brainwashing.
I understand where you're coming from, but I also think that she has finally found what she's been looking for. And it's one of those things that I don't think she understood how much she needed it until she actually found it, and found it kind of by accident. And that's one of those things that like community or like hope, or the things that have a positive impact on your mental health, sometimes they don't look like anything that you thought they would look like. Sometimes you're like, all right, if you're into metal music, then clearly I need to be around people that are into heavy metal or other horror fans, and like that's not entirely true. Like some of my best friends are like into sports. I hate sports, and then there are people that I have a lot in common with, like you two weirdos. So
yeah, right. But yeah, I mean, you hit it before I could say it was the community part. I don't see it as a Stockholm, because I don't think she had the community that she needed before she actually got there. Now they were doing the drugs and all before they got there. So
yeah,
She was doing them. They showed her doing the drugs on the way there with the people she was going to be celebrating with, as part of the ritual before they went into town. You're dealing with somebody who was already mentally broken before she even went. She had lost everything, and now they're feeding her hallucinogens and doing certain activities and things that you could attribute to trying to brainwash. And Stockholm syndrome is the ultimate effect, where she feels like she's part of the group at that point. But at the same time, coming from a perspective where she lost everything and found basically a whole village that seems to understand her and wants to be part of that, that she may have found a new family, so to speak.
I think of this as kind of almost like that scene in Watchmen from when they're in Mars, and Dr. Manhattan is basically like just found out about Lori and Dan, and he goes, I don't understand why you are asking me to save the one thing that I have no connection to if I don't have you. And I think a large portion of that same is applicable for Danny, to where she literally lost everything, and finding out the Christian cheated on her, on top of being like really weird, just kind of like a real, just terrible human being all around. Throughout the course of the film, that was kind of the final nail in the coffin, to where it's like, I don't have a connection to you anymore. Like you were like my last like line of community and connection that was to the United States. Now that I've lost that, now that you don't care enough about me to like, I'm gonna stay here and be around people that actually care about me and make me laugh and make me smile and are wanting to cry with me and wanting to laugh with me and rejoice, and that's honestly what community should be.
yeah, I mean, and for her and him, it was more of a you're mine and I'm yours, and you just broke my trust and everything else. And why should I? So we're done. I don't have that connection because you just broke it. So that is more of just the community of how she was treated and all. They were supposed to be together, and I get on the aspect of him cheating, just killed her on top of already losing her family and all. She thought that was the last person that she loved, and it's gone.
She was already picking up on the fact that he was distancing from her, but it was her last foothold on her own life was Christian.
Yeah, but
And
it's also
at that point, she lost that foothold to normalcy, essentially, which made her more open and accepting to the village.
Danny also feels like a very fragile ecosystem, given the fact that we enter into our connection as the audience with her and essentially this murder suicide that happens, to where, you know, she is very very scared of everything, you know, to where you can definitely see that she has mental health problems, and she's not really coping with them in the best way that she should. You know, she's not going to therapy. She's essentially projecting a lot of that stuff onto Christian, and what that ends up doing is that's fine for like a, you know, I need to vent, I need someone to talk to, I need someone to console me. But if you make a habit of that, you are essentially placing an unfair burden on your partner that is damn near impossible for them to match, and that is essentially now affecting their mental health, which in turn also affects the relationship, the mental health of the relationship as a whole. So that's where we meet them at, especially given the fact that, you know, when we essentially meet Christian and Pele and Mark and Josh, they're kind of all at the bar, and Danny keeps calling, and Mark, for as much of an asshole as he is, he hits it on the head. Like, you need to, like, that's what a therapist is for. That's what a person that is, you know, paid to do that, and also a profession, has studied on how to actually allow you to walk out of those bad habits, or those bad habits in a very healthy way.
Yeah, no, I
Well,
agree. I agree about the therapist and everything.
How
Uh,
healthy was Christian though overall? He doesn't want to be there with her. He's simply tolerating her because he feels bad breaking up with her. The only reason she kept calling at that specific point, what you're talking about, was because she had just gotten the news that her whole family was dead after Christian told her that she was just overreacting and feeding into her sister's bullshit. So Christian's kind of turning all of her issues back around on her, that she's to blame for everything.
that's after she got the message, also
Yeah.
a typed message saying, "I'm done. Mom and Dad are going with me. Goodbye."
Yeah.
But when she keeps calling, she had not received that message, because you have to keep in mind that there's that moment where Mark says, "Oh, is that her again? Like, she needs a therapist, dude." And then when he finally answers, that's when she's just received the news that she's lost her family.
Yeah, no, she received the message. I'm saying she didn't receive the message that they were gone.
Yeah.
Because she kept trying to message. The computer screen showed when they showed her sister that there were like 4 or 5 messages from her, that no responses after that message. So she saw that message, but not to your point, she had not gotten the message that what actually transpired.
And I mean, we talked about this on the Life After Beth live episode we did last week, where it was you know, understanding the warning signs of suicide. And suicide in and of, like, death in and of itself is already really hard to kind of cope with and really hard to kind of deal with, but you adding in the fact, you adding in that somebody is dying by, or someone has died by suicide, that kind of changes the circumstances quite a little bit. And especially the fact that this case is not just a suicide, but also a murder suicide for essentially the entire family unit, that is really gonna F somebody up.
And we have no idea how their family unit was. Was she
No.
close to them? Was she the same way she is with Christian? Were they on the outs? Were they just now starting to talk? We have no idea. So we don't know how much of that she could have seen a warning sign, which could be why she was freaking out.
Yeah. Yeah, this is why it's important to just, like, have that general knowledge and that understanding of suicide prevention warning signs, so that you have an understanding of what it's going to be, but also have contingencies in there to where, again, going back to your point, Billy, like not knowing the inner workings of their family unit, I think is something that is really important to consider. But also at the same time, like, we don't even know if they were on the same city, let alone in the same state or the same coast. Like, I mean, she could have been in Canada for all we know, and they could have been in like Texas,
And we don't even know if they were on speaking terms. I
That
mean,
too.
we saw a message online. So,
Well, Christian said that her sister was always doing that. So that leads me to believe that, yes, her and her sister and family were on speaking terms.
Yes. And that, like, again, that goes back to something we talked about with Life After Beth. Like, always, even if someone's like saying, like, oh, they're just doing this for attention, like, dude, like, nah, man, take that shit seriously. Like if someone's crying out to you and saying, like, I don't want to be alive anymore, I'm gonna sell all my stuff, like, they might say it in a joking manner, but there's a level of seriousness and a level of heartbreak that is actually being presented there. Like, that is them actually being vulnerable. Like take it seriously.
yeah, and sometimes it's hard for people to be even that much vulnerable to even try to make a joke to show that they need the help versus coming out and saying, I need help. That may be their way of, hey, if I can slide this in here, let's see what they say.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, again, like, there needs to be this level of just response and like understanding that, like, everything is going to be everything's going to be okay, but like sometimes it takes that journey and that practice of like accepting and believing everything that is viewed as a cry for help regardless.
Yeah, I mean, and it comes back to community and friendships or therapy or whatever, sometimes to get you into that space that everything will be okay and come out of the space where everything's failing, everything sucks, nothing's going to get better. I don't feel welcome. I feel worthless, whatever it may be. You need the people to pull you out of that, or like somebody to talk to help you pull yourself out of that.
Well, something interesting about the movie that may not be thought about. There was some sort of research released a couple years ago talking about how the Amish community is growing with people that are just done with the everyday life and finding some sort of fitting in this more primitive way, so to speak. And that was something I thought was kind of neat in the movie, that you could almost compare it to that study. She found some sort of relief in a much almost more primitive way of life.
I think it's more of a primitive sounds like such a nasty word.
Yeah.
It does, but it does, but at the same time,
I
the point.
I think it's more simple, and I think also too, like,
Yeah, simple. There we go. More simple life.
I think also too, like, going off of that. So I'll talk to you, and I'll respond to you, and then there's something I want to add to something that Billy said is, social media, like, we are just now starting to understand it, and social media has existed for now 20 years. MySpace came out in Zanga 2005, and here we are 2025. So we're starting just now to understand the lasting effects of things like Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. All of that stuff is starting to have an effect. And so what research has found, and like other people that I know that have kind of kicked social media, is that they kind of maybe don't go quite back to the simplicity of life as quiet as, the Amish or even the Mennonite, but having that removal of all of that social, all of those aspects, like, really do have an impact on your mental health for the positive. I definitely know that there are days where I'm like, I don't want to be on social media. And so I just kind of ghost everyone. And those are days where I feel the best, but then there are days where I like social media. So, but Billy, to your point about not knowing where she's at also in her own mental health journey is a lot of times I think I hear this from a lot of people when I recommend therapy to people. A lot of people say, I went to therapy once and it was okay, or I went to therapy once and it sucked. And sometimes therapist is not necessarily about it takes 3 or 4 therapists before you find one that you actually click with. I've been fortunate enough to find mine in 2. But I mean, even my wife, like, has, I think she's on her 5th therapist in the last 2 years. And it's just, she'll go through a season where she's like, I really click with this. And then couple sessions will go by and she's like, I don't really feel like I'm being heard. And I don't really feel like I'm, being acknowledged. And that again is just finding the people that click with you. And so that also might be where Danny is.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it could be a journey to find the right person to talk to as a therapist and everything.
It's hard.
Mark brought up the Amish, and what I thought about during this movie, it's funny that he said that, was it Rumspringa, where they get to leave,
yeah,
and come back. It kind of felt like that's what it was, but this one was you got to bring your friends back.
Well, that's kind of what they were describing, was that they were sent out to come back with outside input in various manners.
Yeah. Right. I also too really like the scene in particular where Pele and Josh are talking and he's asking questions about the culture and how they look at essentially life as seasons, to where when I think it's from birth to 18 is considered spring, 18 to 36 is considered summer, 36 to 54 is fall, and then winter is 54 to 72. You kind of reach your end there. I thought that was something that was really beautiful, and it really simplifies life.
What was kind of cool is they ask him what happens after 72, and he kind of jokingly is like, and they're like, oh, ha, 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 ha. And
that's when you swan dive. So
he was telling them the absolute truth.
Yeah.
But I mean, like they discussed on there, where that's their belief. Our belief is to put older people or parents in homes and things like that. So on their end, they can look at that's crazy.
That also depends on the culture you're talking about.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Each culture's got their own way of dealing with it. Some cultures where the family just all lives together and that's it. America like this.
America and a lot of European countries have a tendency to just put the elderly out of view by sticking them in homes and forgetting about them.
Yeah, again, that goes back to how we as a Western society like to stigmatize so many things that are uncomfortable, whether you're talking not just about mental health or sex, but also at the same time, you're talking about things like the homeless or abortion or, how we treat our elders. There's been a couple of really fantastic movies that have been released outside of the horror genre that I recommend, just to kind of have an understanding of how we as a society view, or at least how, I want to say take advantage, but movies like I Care a Lot and The Beekeeper are really great examples of how we mistreat our elderly.
Yeah, I mean, and the other things you mentioned, like alcohol and things like that over in Europe aren't as frowned upon when they're younger, because that's part of the culture. They're drinking wine when they're young with dinner. I know that I think I've said it before, when we were over there in Germany, we got permission from my parents, and what they told me is we were to try to learn and follow their customs while they're there. So there's other places over there where drugs aren't as frowned upon. It's you walk into the places and like, hey, I need this, and they'll hand it to you, or you buy it. But so again, each part of society and each place handles things differently.
What I also think, we talked about this earlier, how uncomfortable the deflowering scene is. But I think one of the things that, again, is like, this is like it's this act of, a woman becoming, a girl becoming a woman. And for us, that seems like really shameful to like talk or address sex in that way, to where like, we as a society, we don't address and we don't talk about these types of things the way that we probably should. And there's so much stigma that is around the idea of sex or misinformation about sex. And what I find refreshing about a movie like Midsommar is you're stepping into another culture and getting to see not only how they look at things like alcohol and drugs, two other things that we shame here in America. But
alcohol isn't shamed in America. It's highly advertised and pushed.
it is.
It is shamed that you shouldn't have it until a certain age.
Yeah. But what I'm trying to say is that, like, sex here is this like glorious experience.
It's celebrated.
Yeah, it's celebrated. And I think that that's something that we probably should do here in America. And I think a lot of the reason why you have alcohol that has like an age cap on it, or drugs, and why they're shamed, is because, like, we are a quote unquote Christian nation, and the Bible talks about not having anything enter your body that can alter your mind, and being sober, and all of these other things. And it's so, I think a lot of that ideology is the reason why there's so much shame that is engrossed into not only drugs, but also alcohol, and I would even dare say like things like pornography, or promiscuous sex, or sex that is just outside of procreation, like sex for pleasure's sake.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of things with our society, as far as like we've set up all these rules of certain ages and everything, I think that causes us to try to do those things, to break the rules. Whereas a lot of places overseas that don't have the rules, a lot of times they don't have the same problems we do. For instance, the alcohol, it's not as bad over there.
I would probably say that like parts of like Asia and like China and Japan probably have like a bit of a stricter hold on purity than we do, but kind of like second to none. Like
it depends on if tentacles are involved.
Mark's got experience. So I didn't say this yet about the movie, but I liked how they used the color, like the darker at the beginning, and open it up to the lighter as it went through. Like she was coming out of the darkness into the light, even though drugs were involved, to where at the beginning it was really dark in the scenes.
Yeah.
And when they went overseas, it started, or when they went to Sweden, you started getting the light, and not purity, but it started like opening our eyes.
Part of that had to do with the fact of where they were going, and the difference in the daytime hours and the shortness of nighttime, and how disorienting it could be for some people.
I get that, but at the same time, a lot of movies use those to their advantage to show darkness versus lightness of how somebody's seeing the world.
I also I see both of your points, like its location, but also at the same time, like I think what makes this movie as effective as it is because you're seeing these horrendous things in like broad daylight, and we're so conditioned as a movie going audience to assume that these horrific things take place like in the guise of night or just pure darkness, or where shadows kind of play with your mind. And I think that's partially why we've mentioned like the swan dive scene and like some of the pube scenes, and just how this film uses violence, but it like doesn't shy away from it. And I think it's more effective because of that.
What's the face for, Mark?
Mark's running on lack of sleep.
That's usually your I've got something to say to that face. So that's why I was like,
No, that's the making sure my eyes are still functioning face at the moment.
Gotcha.
Well, I think with that said, I think that's going to do it for us on this episode of Abyss Gazing, but we're going to keep the fucked up train rolling a little bit when we come back next week and talk about Martyrs. But Mark, where can people find you online?
Usually here with you guys.
He's learning.
I don't do much with social media. I'm more of a creeper on social media. I look at stuff and I steal people's memes. That's kind of what I do.
Yeah, I can attest. We own the exclusive rights to Mark Moore here at Abyss Gazing, which you can catch every Wednesday wherever you guys get your podcasts from at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Billy, hit him with the greatest social media network.
That's Letterboxd. I'm VA Boy 99, and you got Captain Nostalgia over here.
Right here. Mark is on there, but I don't remember his handle. I really wish I did because I would plug it for him.
We'll find
I
it.
don't even know the last time I've done anything on Letterboxd.
I gotta find it. I'm just gonna start plugging it for you, and hopefully we'll grow that following for you. You guys can find me on my other podcast every other Monday. It is That's High Praise, a Nicolas Cage podcast. You guys can find our parent company, Victims and Villains. We are on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Patreon, and wherever you guys get your podcasts from. But until next time, remember, the longer that you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes back into you.